Well. Now we get to the difficult part. This morning, we have a little exercise for you. I want you guys to try something, only we're going to kind of expand on the theme that we were working on last time. Part of what I wanted you to do when you did demonstration subjects, some of you got the idea of it, some of you had a little trouble with it, is the purpose of the demonstration subject is to allow you to talk to the audience. Okay, part of the whole phenomenon of spatially anchoring and connecting dots is because I believe that most people learn better unconsciously than they learn consciously. In fact, most of what you've learned in your life, you have learned unconsciously. Now, if we can take things and connect them together, that is to package learning so that it goes into the unconscious. And most people haven't studied much about this because it's very hard to consciously study unconscious things. However, it's very easy to do them. A gentleman got in the elevator with me this morning, and he said to me, he said, I really want to thank you for not being as violent a person as you can be. And, when I haven't had my coffee yet, that's not the smartest thing to say. But he said, well, you know, he always takes notes, and he can't stop himself from taking notes, and I haven't killed him yet. He said, but he's been working with other people in here and learning to trust his unconscious and discovering that things are, in fact, going in. That in spite of the fact you've had years of education where they told you, you must show your work. That's my favorite stupid thing that teachers do. Teachers believe that math is visual, and it's not. All great mathematicians are kinesthetic by definition. We squiggle visual things around to get a feeling. It's the feeling that tells you whether you're right or not. Now, the reason teachers have you show your work is so that they know what you've done. Now, when I was in school, teachers would do things like they would say, okay, Richard, go up to the blackboard and do this problem. And they'd give me this complicated problem. They'd say, okay, give us the, x equals y times 15 divided by the square root of h. And I would go, -1. And they would go, but you didn't show the work. And I'd go, there wasn't any. Because if I ask you to multiply 5 times 5, you don't actually go and make fucking pictures in your head. It just comes out like this. And when things come from the unconscious automatically, this is the very mechanism that works. Now, if you don't teach people things right, it won't come out automatically. What happens is that people can do one thing, but they can't keep track of the other. This is part of the problem people had yesterday, is that they were busy thinking about the handshake interrupt instead of thinking about the fact that it was only a way. Because the real handshake interrupt was when you stopped your hand, I wanted you to get the response from the audience. Because not just does the hypnotic subject go into trance, so does everybody else. Now, a long time ago, I had a client. It's a great client. I've had over the years, I've had some of the best clients because psychiatrists got into this thing of trying to defeat me because I was an embarrassment. I mean, I was 23 years old, and every psychiatric patient they threw my way would end up walking out feeling great, and the psychiatrist would come limping out with their problems. And I mean, one of the best ones is there was this poor woman. I mean, she was about 50 years old, and she came in, she had this stiff leg like this. She walked in like this, and she came in, and she tried to sit down, and her leg even stuck out straight in front of her. And the psychiatrist that came with her tells me the following. He said, well, Richard, he said, we wanted you to use hypnosis to see if you could give her some relief from her problem. And I said, oh, what's her problem? And she points to the leg like this. She goes like this. And he said, well, I said, is something wrong with her leg? And he said, no, it's all in her mind. And I looked down. I said, it looks like it's in the leg. And he said, no. He said, we've checked neurologically and medically. We've done x-rays. We've done MRIs. There's no physical basis for her leg to be like that. And so I looked at him and I said, so it could be in any leg then. And he went right for it. He went, what? And I said, and I pointed to the psychiatrist. I said, it could be in any leg. And he looked down and he went, I guess so. Now that's making it pretty easy for me, actually. So I began this long hypnotic induction, and I looked at her and I said, now, in a moment, you're going to start to go into a trance. And when you go into a trance, it's going to be deeper and deeper and deeper still. I love the word still. You guys are getting too easy. You're getting this like still, and you all go. But we're not doing that part today. We're doing a different part. You can keep breathing now. Anyway, this psychiatrist, has the idea that to him, he believes that the way in which hypnosis works is that people are suggestible, and some people are suggestible, and some people aren't. Now, as I began to talk to her, of course, the minute I said to her, close your eyes, the psychiatrist sat there like this, right? And I said to her, even with your eyes closed, some eyes can defocus. And the psychiatrist went. So I figured this was going to be pretty easy. And I told her that the problem wasn't that her leg had something wrong in her head. The problem was it was the wrong leg. And I said, I know your leg, your analog marked leg. That's part of how you do presuppositions. Your leg is about to soften. Your knee will bend only because your unconscious wants you to understand the importance of the message I'm about to deliver. And I said, now, and I lifted up her arm and I said, I want you to let your arm go down only at the rate that your leg bends back to being a normal leg, like your left leg, because it had been the right leg. And I said, and as you do, I want your other leg to begin to come up and get stiff so that you know that your unconscious can forget to remember what isn't important about what it is that you don't know that we didn't do. And I said, because a lot of times we forget to remember, and we're used to that. But remembering to forget is a whole other business. Because the more you remember to forget what it is that you don't know about which leg is about to become stiff, the more we'll understand that when I count from 3 to 1, you're going to stand up, and this will be reversed in the first sense of the word. Because what's right can be left out, and what's left is the right thing to do. And I went 1, 2, 3, and she stood up and began to walk over to the bathroom. She said, oh, I have to go to the bathroom. And she walked over. She got halfway across the room, and she went, I'm hobbling on the wrong leg. And she tried to shift it back, and she couldn't. I always love it when they do that, too, by the way. She tried to shift it back, and she couldn't do it. She turned around and looked at me angrily, and she said, you're playing a trick on me. And I went, yes. And I said, but here's the best part. What's left in your leg is going to come right out. And I pointed to the psychiatrist. And suddenly her legs went normal. And she went, I can walk. And I said, sure you can walk. I said, you could walk before, you just didn't walk very well. I said, now, of course, psychiatrists believe that there's secondary gain. And as long as you have that belief, it might be true. And she said to me, and she goes, what's secondary gain? And I said, oh, it's not important. I'll get back to that in a moment. So, In 1971, another psychiatrist came to me. He was an expert on hypnosis. It said so in his book. He gave me a copy of his book, and he said that he had been studying hypnosis with Milton Erickson and with Leslie Lecron, David Cheek, and a host of other very famous hypnotists. And he was in the process of doing a research study and wanted to know if I would participate in it. And I told him no. And he said, I came all the way to California to persuade you. And I said, that was stupid. You could have called me, and I would have said, no, I don't believe in the kind of research that you do. Get out. And he refused to, so I opened the door, and I called my German Shepherds. I had 2 big German Shepherds. They both also have PhDs in fetching the face. And I said to the dogs, please fetch me the face. And they went, ah! It was kind of like a scene from The Exorcist. And they went and chased this guy down the hill on which I lived, and they came back. One had a shoe, one had a pant leg. And I got this call from a really upset psychiatrist. He said, why did you sick the dogs on me? And I said, practice. The dogs need practice. And he went, well, I am totally confused. He said, I came all this way. It's a great honor to participate in this. And I went, really? I said, isn't participating it mean work for free? And I said, and don't the reason you need me is because you're a lousy fucking hypnotist, even though it says in your book you're a good one. And he said, no. He said, I'm a very good hypnotist. I said, good. Then go into a deep trance right now, hypnotize yourself, and see me in front of you saying no. And if you feel like you want to call me back, imagine 2 German Shepherds at your feet, snapping hungrily. And in the infinite wisdom of him, he got in his car and drove back to my house, knocked on the front door. This time I said, well, this guy is slow to convince. I mean, some people, it takes a lot of convincing. Me, a couple of German Shepherds chasing me half a mile would pretty much do it. This guy, no, he gets back in his car, drives back up because he feels safer that way. I guess I could understand that. So when I opened the door, he came in, I said, okay. I said, you're going to take a lot more convincing. I said, what exactly research do you want to do? And he said, well, we're going to take 1,000 people who can't sleep and find out how many of them can we cure their insomnia by using hypnosis. And I said, I already know the answer. And he said, what? I said, I know the answer already, exactly. If I hypnotize them, all of them. If you hypnotize them, none of them. I said, that's the difference between a statistic and a pattern. And he said, well, I've had some luck with insomnia. And I said, really? I said, can you sleep at night? And he said, well, I always wake up at night a number of times. He said, I never feel that rested. And I said, well, if I could hypnotize you and make it so that you slept deeply, that you slept softly and with great sense of comfort and woke up alert enough to know 2 dogs are chasing you, and that it's not wise to come back here, do you suppose you would be satisfied and leave me out of your future plans? And he said, I'll have to call my colleagues. Because they had given him this thing they wanted. For some reason, they wanted me to do this. I don't know why. But I don't really believe in research, because the problem with research is that researchers are involved. And the trouble with research is that it's based on the null set hypothesis. Let me explain to you the null set hypothesis. If I want to prove that something is true, what I do is I decide what would not be true if that were true. Then I set about proving that wouldn't be true if what I want to be true is true. And if I'm able to do it because I use double-blind studies, the more I'm unable to prove that what would be true if it wasn't true is true or not true, then I'm able to clearly see what's going on. It's no wonder we've ever invented anything, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the scientific method, which is the null set hypothesis, which also has a part of the foundation that what makes results verifiable is that they can be repeated in the same situation, and I don't believe there is a such thing as same situation. Every audience you teach will be totally different. And some of them will look the same. Sometimes you'll look down and you'll go, this person here was in the last seminar, and they'll have a different name tag, but they'll even have the same clothes on. It's weird. Trust me, it's not so much in this group because you guys are deliberately moving around, and I warned you ahead of time. But when you start doing especially intro groups, you'll discover that a lot of times the way in which people have organized their internal submodalities determines a lot about where they'll sit. Or if they grew up in a world where everybody had to sit alphabetically, they've developed a fetish for a certain chair. And if you make it so they can't sit there, so they'll leave their stuff on the chair and leave the room, and I move it one chair over, and they come in and they absolutely get irate about it. Who moved my stuff? And they'll look at somebody and they'll go, actually, that was my chair, when they're going to have the chair right next to it. Thus demonstrating the rigidity of the way in which their mind works. Because you see, if your understanding submodalities are very rigid and they're right here, in order for you to understand, you have to be sitting at the right angle. In fact, if I walk across the chair, they will shift their whole body. And I mean, once you have somebody who's that rigid, that means anything you put in that place, they have to understand. So what I like to put in there is that you have to understand differently. I love paradox. It's just, it's one of those things that thrills me. But anyway, so I was talking to my German Shepherds about this, and because they were confused. I use them as a negotiating tool. People said, what do you think the best negotiating tool is? And I said, well, if you're not allowed to use a gun, 2 large dogs is always useful. Because once when I was negotiating a contract, I had my dogs sit down on the floor. And dogs are very perceptive about certain things, especially since I trained dogs that were attack-trained German Shepherds. They sniffed out drugs. They did everything, which was really cool because they were constantly bringing me drugs. And I had 2 dogs that I used to train the other dogs. And when I had the ranch, I would have sometimes up to 50 puppies, and they'd be being trained. And it would be because, like, the pool guy came over one day. The pool guy came over, and he was, doing his thing with the pool that he did every morning. And suddenly I was watching out the window. One of my dogs went like this. He went like this. And he went over to the bag the guy had, and he pulled out this big baggie of white powder. And he came and he took it, and he walked over to the edge of the pool, and he looked up at the pool guy. And the pool guy looked down and went, ah! Like this, and went running over to the dog, and the dog flipped it into the pool. Right? A dog had a sense of humor. All dogs have a sense of humor. A lot of people don't realize that, but dogs play jokes all the time. They think they have they think stuff is funny. They always put stuff where you step on it. They think that's terribly funny for some reason, especially squeak toys. Any of you have dogs that have squeak toys? And my dog, for example, thought it was a lot of fun to chew on tennis balls and then put them in with the regular tennis balls. So that when you go out on the tennis court and you go and you miss it and you'd reach in that bucket, you'd pull out this disgusting thing, and you'd look at it be all brown with slobber all over it, and the dog would all be over there. He just thought that was terribly funny. And the other thing is they have certain people that they think playing jokes on is even more fun than you could imagine. And one of my dogs was a great big dog. He weighed 130 pounds, which is big even for a German Shepherd. And he was a big bull, but I mean, he could stand up on his paws and put them on your shoulders and look you in the face. And huge dog, but had a great fucking sense of humor. And I used him a lot for working with clients because he would come in and he would lay down and he would act like the sweetest dog in the world. And I'd say to people, things like, okay, well, I really want you to, okay, I had a social phobic. Social phobics, by the way, are kind of cool because you can always try to meet them in public places and they can't quite get in, because you see, like agoraphobes are afraid to go outside. Social phobics can go everywhere. They just can't talk to anyone when they get there. And this guy comes out, and he's trying to meet me, and I was sitting with a bunch of people in a seminar at lunch. And I was sitting there and talking to a bunch of people, and I saw him come up because I told him to meet me there. He got to the room, and he looked in the room, and he started to walk, and he saw the people, and he went like this. Now, I brought my dog with me, and I had told the dog ahead of time what was happening. So I told the dog, wait out in the hallway, and I said, when I give you the signal, I'll point to the person. I said, what you do is make sure they find their way inside. Dog went, I can do that. They'd outside in the hallway, and I had one of those seeing eye things so that I could bring him with me everywhere. I had a little white cane and dark glasses. And he couldn't carry the cane, but he liked the dark glasses. So he was out in the hallway with his dark glasses on, hanging out. And all of a sudden, I gave him the signal, and the guy tried to sneak back out, and he turned around, and the dog went, and he walked inside the room, and the dog went, and he walked in closer, and he kept backing up, and all of a sudden, he'd backed himself all the way into the circle of people next to me, and I said, "Hi, how you doing?" And he turned around and went, and I said, "Hello." Right? And he looked at the dog, and the dog went, and the guy looked at me, and he went, "Hello." And I said, "Have you met my dog?" And he said, "Your dog growled at me." And I said, "Yeah, but he hasn't bit you yet." Now, the moral to all of this is really quite simple. The exercise that I want you to do is designed to allow you to accomplish certain things which are unconsciously unimportant right now, but will be in a moment. Because if you're going to teach people to do things, simple things, even things like learn that secondary gain is a stupid concept, okay, psychiatrically, I'm sorry, but they told me in the beginning, I heard it over and over again. Every fucking psychiatrist, every therapist, they all loved my work because I studied Virginia, and Virginia was really nice. And then I said, I'm going to learn hypnosis, and they all went boom, into a deep trance. They looked at me and they went, hypnosis is bad, and it doesn't exist, which only made me more interested. They said, hypnosis only treats the symptom. So I got off on this jag because all these nice psychiatrists bringing me all of these patients, I thought needed a lesson in exactly how the unconscious worked. Because at the moment that this woman no longer was limping, suddenly the psychiatrist was. Now I love their response. They always did this. They'd go, this is a hypnotic phenomenon. If you name it, it's supposed to go away. They believe that insight therapy thing. And I'd go, yeah? And they'd go, wow. And they'd limp around more. And meanwhile, the patient is hopping and dancing around and laughing hysterically. And the psychiatrist would say to me, okay, I get your point. And I'd go, well, what is it? And he'd go, well, you're trying to say that, that you can, with hypnosis, covertly switch a symptom to another leg, and then you could even put it in someone for no reason. And I'd go, well, no, there was a reason. Do you know what it is? And they'd go, it's a lesson. And I'd go, close, but not really. And they go, well, I don't know. And I go, then you're going to have to remain crippled for the rest of your life. Because if you don't understand your problems, how can you change? And they'd walk around and they'd go, well, is it the thing about secondary gain? And I'd go, no. And the patient would laugh more, and I'd laugh more, and my dog would be rolling on its stomach. He thought it was terribly funny. Because you see, inside of all of this, the lesson was that if you're going to act like a fucking idiot, you're going to look like a fucking idiot. It's that simple. Unfortunately, by giving people MDs and calling them psychiatrists and giving them pen sets and stethoscopes and the ability to prescribe pharmaceutical drugs, which aren't nearly as strong nor as effective or as good for you as most of the drugs you can get on the street. Things like Cinequan are bad for you. I'm sorry, but some of these psychiatric drugs have a 6-month half-life. At that time, Thorazine, Halophene, these things are destroying human beings. They're not helping them. This woman was very upset about this paralyzed hysterical conversion. And they said that the stiffness came from somewhere and converted itself into something else. And they had gone in her childhood and dug around and found bad things. Because they believed if you understood how fucked up you were, that suddenly you would mysteriously no longer be fucked up. But the psychiatrist understood how fucked up he was. I told him. I said, look, I did this to you because you're a jerk. And I said, and because you've been screwing up your patients and you don't understand that if hypnosis only treats the symptom, that's a good thing. Not a bad thing. It means the symptom is gone. I said, if you had a giant tumor on your penis, right, and somebody said, we don't know why it's come there, but if we put magic dust on it, it will disappear. Would you go, I'm sorry, I don't want magic dust because I need to know the root cause of this tumor? And he looked at me and he went, well, no, I'd take the magic dust. And I said, here's some dust. And his leg went clear. Now, for our purposes here, once you understand that if you want to connect dots between things, like doing stupid things leads to stupid activities, if you begin to take responses and information and put them inside of each other. For example, what I'm going to ask you guys to do is really pretty simple. I want you to go back into your little tiny groups. You don't have to be in the same one, but it would be nice this time if you spoke the same language. I don't always require that, but in this example, it's going to be useful. Because what I want you to do is I want you to start with a story, and I want you to go part of the way through it. And the story is going to be about responses. Each story is to get a response, but also in it, you're going to package information this time. Because what we want to do is we want to start with each of these, and when you get part of the way through this one, I want you to go to 2. So I don't want you to finish 1 because I want you to go all the way through 5 and then go 4, 3, 2, 1, so that spatially you anchor the responses you get by location. Now, why did I pick 5 stories? What do you think the answer to that is? People go, how can we keep track of so many things? Okay. I'd say start with your thumb. And if it's too complicated, you stick it up your ass. Otherwise, you just hold out your thumb and it so that literally as you go through and you start the story, remember as soon as you get the response you want, all the information that goes with it is connected to the response. Then literally move yourself to another location and start another story. Now, I would recommend, just for our purposes here, so you don't have to think about it too much, that what you talk about are just the simple things. Talk about when people hesitate. It is one of the major problems on planet Earth. Okay? As far as I can tell, fear and hesitation are the 2 biggest problems. There's too much fear on this planet, and there's too many people doing things to make it worse. If they argued for another 5 fucking years about this and had inspections, I could live with that. I'm sorry. I would be nice, but I'm just afraid they're going to go in and they're going to fight a big fucking war and they're not going to be able to find the anthrax. And then, there's going to be some asshole sitting around with big giant things of anthrax, and he's going to go, well, if I sell this to somebody, I could buy a big house. And, so he's going to take big giant canisters of anthrax, and some guy's going to put it on his camel and take it across the border to some other mentally retarded place. And they're going to divide it up and put it in packages and start mailing it to post offices in New Jersey. This sounds familiar somehow, doesn't it? I don't know. Either that, or worse than that, one of these Christian militias in Ohio will buy it. The guys that, these da-da-da-da-da. Is that a familiar sound to some of you? As you move from the coasts of the United States towards the center, you start hearing banjos playing in the back of your head. There are places like Arkansas, and once you get to Arkansas, there are actually cities where people are civilized, but outside those cities, there are people dating their farm animals, okay? And I just am afraid some of these people who would decide that Armageddon is a good idea, they're going, Armageddon's been taking too long. Let's take some of this anthrax and we'll spread it in a plane and fly it all over the place. They'll put it, they'll put it inside a van and try and drive it to China. I was watching television the other day, and I want to tell you, if ever there's anything to be afraid of, it's interviewing the public. Because this guy was going to drive his car around the world for peace. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think there's some serious problems with that. And the one guy said, well, what are you going to do when you get to the edge of Russia? Because he was leaving from Europe, and he was going to drive all the way across everything and across Russia. And then said he was going to somehow or other get this car to be towed across the Bering Straits when it's frozen or something. And I thought, yeah, this is going to help world peace a lot. Let's see, there'll be a piece of the fender and a piece of the wheel well, maybe a piece of the driver. That, to me, but the hardest part, I think, to drive across would probably be when he drove down to the U.S. He couldn't decide whether to go across Canada or to go across America. And he decided that America had better roads than Canada, which proves, number one, he hasn't been to Canada. Because Canada has huge roads, there's just nothing on them. I drove one time. I made a huge mistake. I drove from Chicago to Toronto because somebody told me it was a beautiful drive. I think the road bent twice. There was absolutely nothing on it. And when they say last chance for gas, they're not kidding. Even if you fill up, it's still your last chance for gas. And I drive big cars. I like big cars. I just, if I'm in a car, I just want to be able to land a plane on the front of it. I want to take everything I own with me. When they came out with these Winnebago things, I looked at this, as a car to scoot around town in. That I had to buy one of those things. I thought they were great, but I found out they were way expensive. Then I found out you can rent them. Is that not the coolest thing? You can go out and rent a gigantic 80-foot Winnebago, go into your house and take everything out and put it in there and go on vacation. Now, I did a lecture tour up and down the west coast of the U.S., and my wife is even worse at me when it comes to taking things. Any of you who have ever moved my suitcases know what you're talking about. It's like when I landed the plane and all the luggage comes off, and the guy goes, "Which is yours?" I go, "This." And they always come up with a little dolly cart, and then after a few moments, they go back and get the big fucking long one. And then they get another guy with another long one. And that's just my wife's luggage. But so I drove this Winnebago down the coast of California, and while I'm driving down the coast of California in this giant thing, my wife silently says to me, "You missed the turnoff." Right? And I'm driving down the coast road, which is a beautiful road. Highway 1 goes down, and you see the ocean on one side and the hippies on the other side. These are people who are stuck in 1960. You can tell by the clothing they wear. And, it's all about smoking dope. They smoke so much dope, and they ran out of chocolate chip cookies, so they're waiting. That's what I think is going on. And said, because nowadays, the next generation picked a new drug of choice. They all picked coffee for some reason. My daughter is part of the coffee generation, and we're worried about a few people smoking joints in California. I started to tell you yesterday about Robert Anton Wilson, because he wrote a letter to President Bush when he was elected. And he said, "Dear President Bush, I'm now 65 years old. Do you think I'm mature enough to decide whether or not I could smoke a joint?" Of course, he didn't get an answer to that letter. I used to write to my congressman all the time, but I got the same letter back all the time. It always said, "We are considering your proposal." Right? But yet they never tried any of them. I always thought I had such great proposals. For example, they had this thing called the national debt, and my recommendation was that they stopped it. That if you stop borrowing against the future, you won't have to pay it off later. But they had big important stuff that they wanted to build. After all, we need more Trident submarines. Can never have enough of those. But then I started thinking, in the future, when we decide that we don't need a big submarine with multi-nuclear warheads, because, of course, right now we don't really have any good enemies. We're having to pick on these little countries. It used to be the Soviet Union versus the U.S. You could kind of get into that, It was a little more evenly matched, even though almost none of their weapons really worked that well, because they used American designs. They would come in and steal. And they'd also, do you realize Russia can't make an IC chip to this day? So that meant all the electronics they had to swipe from the U.S. So they would send in covert agents, and these covert agents would buy all the electronic stuff. So all the control system inside of all of these Russian missiles and stuff was made in California by a company which, later on turned out to be a CIA front. Can you imagine that? And so it turns out when they would fire missiles off, they would drop into the sea in Finland, and the Russians would go, "We did everything right. We followed the plans." It's faulty materials. That's what it is. And it wasn't until the Japanese were nice enough to come along and build really good IC chips that they could steal them from somewhere else, that their equipment. So now their space shuttle works and ours blows up. Think about that. We're having some serious problems. We should subcontract this stuff out to people who make reliable automobiles. That's what I think. That was one of my suggestions, and the people at NASA didn't think that was funny. But then they don't have a sense of humor. You're not allowed to have a sense of humor. They said, "We're doing important things, checking everything except the tiles." Don't you think that if you were on the outside of the Earth flying around in one of these things, and one of the guys mentions to you at takeoff that there was a piece of foam that flopped up against the thing and some of your heat tiles may have been knocked off, I think that calls for a spacewalk, don't you guys? I would have gone outside and looked. I think that would have been, but they said there was no point in it because they had no extra tiles. Now, I don't know about you guys. I'd want a few extra tiles with me, considering either that or I'd want to go over to the space station and wait until somebody brought me some. But, there was a point at which we had scientists, real scientists, running NASA, but it wasn't cost effective. They weren't doing enough for telecommunications system, so they got rid of all of these guys that wanted to explore space and open up what I consider to be the most important thing for humanity, unlimited resources. Because the problem with being on the Earth, you guys remember the experiment with the fruit flies? Okay. They took a bunch of fruit flies. And they said, these fruit flies are humanity. And they put the fruit flies in the jar with one apple. And they closed it and punched a few holes in the top. Well, to begin with, if it was humanity, there would be no holes in the top of the jar. Then they said, this is the Earth going through space. So where are the holes? This is what I think of science. But anyway, the fruit flies multiplied till they consumed all the oxygen and all the resources and shit all over the place, so they poisoned themselves and died. And they went, this is the population explosion. We're consuming all of our resources. And in fact, if you think about resources, as soon as you begin to conserve resources, you are in fact admitting that you're going to run out. It's just a matter of time. So one day there was a guy sitting there staring up at the universe, going, where could we get more resources? I don't know. There just aren't any more. We're going to run out. There's only so much oil. And when it's gone, all the cars will stop, except the ones running on water, as it turns out. You can use water instead of oil. But they don't go as fast because we haven't made great batteries, but we'll make great batteries. When we make great batteries, I wish they would make them for flashlights. They put them in everything else. I don't know what's with my razor now. I got a new electric razor. This thing never runs out. I don't know what it is. And when you charge it, you stick it on and go, full. It sucks electricity out of the wall. I don't know how it does it. Holds electricity forever, and all I do is I set it on the counter, and my flashlight looks at it and goes, I feel so bad, Richard. Because I wish I was like that razor that never ran out. And I said, well, at least you don't have fruit flies in you. Now, when I listen to scientists, it's about what I hear, because they're not looking at the possibility. There are guys like Robert Peltzer. He's one of the guys that worked on the Manhattan Project. He's responsible for, one of the guys that, like Oppenheimer, who developed the atomic bomb, which led to the hydrogen bomb, something for which I'm not sure if we should be grateful or not, so that we could build nuclear power plants, big steam engines. That's what a nuclear power plant is. It's time for a new idea about how to make electricity, I think. There's got to be better ideas other than heating water up and making steam and turning turbines, especially when you have to risk the population of the Earth to do it. Oppenheimer, when he blew off the first A-bomb, think about this. They came to him and they said, well, what do you think? And he said, well, there's only two possibilities. Either it will burn the atmosphere off of the Earth because the chain reaction won't stop, or it will go, as I predict, a certain amount and it will stop, and we'll have the biggest weapon on the Earth. So him and one general decided we should try it and find out. Now, I don't know about you guys. I would have thought that through a little longer. I would have gone, destroy the whole Earth, have the biggest bomb. Is there a third choice? No, I'm sorry, there isn't. Because we can't wait to know. We just have to know the answer. Because if we don't know the answer right away, we won't be able to create mass destruction on a greater scale than we are already. But you see, having developed biological weapons in this country, having developed things, guys like Peltzer went, well, yeah, but we could use this for good purposes. We don't have to use it for bad purposes. In fact, he set as a goal going into space, grabbing a hold of an asteroid, towing it back by Earth, and taking it apart and getting its natural resources out of it and building a factory in orbit. They decided he was a lunatic. They said, you realize we could use these same resources to put nuclear weapons and lasers floating around the Earth so that we could exterminate anything we wanted. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if there just happens to be a big laser up in the sky, You know, because I know Star Wars, they say they didn't build, but I have this feeling that maybe they did. I just can't imagine they spent $12 trillion and didn't put one laser up there, do you think? And I have a good use for it. I say we call a meeting. And we get all the warmongers together in one place, and we evaporate them. Wouldn't it be great if they each got to give a speech and they went up and went, God is on our side, and they dust and down to the earth, right? Now, what do you think the next one would say? Maybe, probably, you know, knowing world leaders would take like 5 or 6 before they noticed. But at that point, pretty soon when the turn is coming up, I could just see, you know, because apparently they say Osama bin Laden is still alive. I don't know about you guys. I have trouble with that. I can't imagine this egomaniac not having, you know, videotaped himself doing something, you know. I mean, unless he's like in a coma but alive or something, or he's down in a tunnel underneath somebody's house and they lied to him and they said, there's been thermonuclear war. You can't come outside. And he's down there going, I've ended the world. I won. And he sits in his tunnel, you know, and shoots up heroin. By the way, when I heard him speak, I grew up in a neighborhood filled with heroin addicts. And I'll tell you, I can identify the voice tone of a heroin addict at 50 yards. And when he gave his speeches, when he was there, Mr. Relaxing, slurring his speech, and when they broke into his house in Candidar and found hypodermic needles and said he was a diabetic, I'm a diabetic, but I don't use 20 needles a day. You know, just one is plenty. You know, take a little insulin, chewed it up. By the way, for those of you who are diabetics, I found out one of the things that they don't tell you about much is that there's something called Vadium sulfate, which is dirt, by the way. It's all over the face of the earth from 500 to 2500. But the AMA discovered in the 20s that soil was being depleted by fertilization, and without Vadium sulfate, that it was causing a lot of people to have the same effect as diabetes, but in reverse. That when you take Vadium sulfate, suddenly you need less insulin. Now, this information's been around for a long time, but it got lost in the 20s, so that current doctors, because doctors don't really read the journals from the AMA, but some of us do. Because even though they're studying things in ways that I don't necessarily believe, I'm always willing to try these things. So I went out and I got myself a big can of it. And I said, how much of this stuff do I take? And it said 300 milligrams a day. And they said it imitates insulin, although insulin is the thing that's not natural and the other one is. So I'm just a matter of description. Does it go this way or does it go that way? I don't know. It's, you know, it depends upon which leg the trance goes into. Now, let me back up here and move over, because if you tell your stories and you start out and you go, okay, the first thing that I want to do is I want to elicit the very response you want to change, because if you want to change a response, it has to be there. If I have somebody with an elevator phobia, I like to meet them at the Peachtree Plaza in Atlanta, 70 stories of glass straight up. Because if they're going to get over their problem, they need to get over it and go into the state of having fun. It's not enough to get rid of your fear. You have to put something in its place. And to be able to get to that, with most of the audiences I talk to, I constantly install in them first a feeling where they want to hesitate. I'll start on the first day, for example, and say, now, pretty soon one of you is going to have to come up here. And everybody goes, and if they don't, I make sure they do. Because I want all your hesitation to be connected. Now, when I start to do that, then I break away and I start to talk about being frustrated about things, the opportunity, the poor. Think of all the meetings that the elevator phobic can't go to. You know, all the restaurants they can't eat on, all the things they can't see, all the things they miss out on, all the hotel rooms they never get to have sex in. You know, when you start going, oh, you know, right now, here we are in this hotel. There are people upstairs having sex, and you're not one of them. Frustrating, isn't it? In fact, your wife could be up there and you couldn't even catch her. Your daughter could be up there right now and you couldn't even go look. You know, it's totally frustrating. I mean, you know, and if you start to think things like you go out with a bunch of your friends and they go, we're going to a nice Italian restaurant. And you go thinking it's going to be on the ground floor and they take you into the Peachtree Plaza and go, well, the restaurant's on the 70th story. And suddenly you have to go in and look like a stupid idiot again and go, well, I'm sorry, I can't go in the elevator. And they go, well, the stairs are over there. Because, you know, people with elevator phobias don't have a height phobia. But they better have track shoes. Because the amount of time it takes to get up 70 stories, everybody will have finished dinner. And then you have to walk back down again. It's kind of a drag, on and on and on. Because if you can begin to get the frustration to build up, then what you can do is you can move on, because frustration leads very easily to impatience. And, think about being at the airlines. You're next in line to get a ticket. How do they make it take so long? They do things, they go, are there any other trips you're interested in discussing? Have you ever heard an airline person say, could we make any other plans for you today? And I like to take them up on that, just so the person behind me might get a coronary. I like to go, yeah, in the year 2014, I'm considering a trip to the Himalayas. And I was wondering, is it best to fly into India first, or should I fly into another country before I go into Tibet? What flights do they have on all the airlines? Tell me about them slowly, please. I like when they ask you your name, you go, what's your name? And they type it, and they can type more letters than you have in your name to hunt for it. Isn't that cool? Your name could be Bob T, and they would go, whoever wrote this program should be killed. That's what I think. But they wrote it in Fortran. That's a really horrible language anyway. And since it's already written, there's no need to change it. But it's back in the old days when computers used to have compiler systems. They used to have a machine to think. Now we have Microsoft. There's nothing in there. You have to load in this Microsoft nonsense system. Or they have this other one, new computer system, and somebody sent me the manuals for it. 20 manuals this big to be able to program in this language. And to me, it was totally ridiculous. And I wrote them back and I said, why did you send me these manuals? I would never use a language like this. And they said, well, it's the one used by the government. And I said, oh, that explains it. And I said, do you think I'm planning to go into government? Do you really think I could be elected to anything, let alone living when I did? I said, I don't think so. I said, I'm sure, that the government has a file on me, and it's probably just as big as those manuals. And it probably says things about being a lunatic. But if you can move from impatience can move to a desire. Because I know all of you desire to be able to communicate more powerfully. And if you can connect the unconscious dots as well as the conscious dots, if you can be able, when you go from hesitating, when you think about things, when they say, I'm going to ask you to do something very complicated. Okay, so today you're going to have to remember 5 stories. Start the first story, and before you finish it. But when you've gotten the response, as soon as you start getting the response, just simply distract yourself and move on to something else. And then when you move on to the next thing, I want you to elicit impatience. Then I want you to elicit some wanton desire. Now, the whole time you're talking about these things, you can also deliver whatever content you want. You can talk about techniques. You can deliver things. You can talk about embedded commands. Because when you begin to go from wanton desire to total go for it, right? And when you talk about people going for things, because there's a point when you go to sit in a chair where it's stupid to try and stop yourself, because gravity will take you down no matter what. Milton always used that when people would come in as they'd sit in his chair. Just before they got to that point of no return, he would go, sleep! Poof, and down they would go. And they would always try to fight gravity, but it was too late. And as they do that, he'd pass his hand out really quick so they would blink. And when they did, he'd say, go to sleep. Now, there's a point at which you totally have to go for anything. And to me, if you don't, you won't use all the resources you have. There's a point at which you have to understand the language patterns we train you in, no matter what NLP course you're in, so that you can hear ambiguities, so that you can hear with me, so that you can begin to understand when I talk about the letter C, it also is an ambiguity in English for seeing. Every language has its own ambiguities in it. Those ambiguities are not just delivered consciously or one way or the other. It's always both or all three. And what this means is the more you're sensitive to it, the more you listen to yourself speak, the more you have a chance to utilize everything. Even rote material, if you can put the motivation underneath it, if you can back up so that the things that you wish you could do that you couldn't do suddenly become easy, so that what you're hesitating about by nesting things together, by starting out and going like this and then putting the pieces back the other way so that you end up where you begin, makes it so that when a woman walks into you who's so paralyzed that she can't move easily, that when you're done and you come back to it and you talk about what you did, because the psychiatrist says, what do I have to do in order to get my leg to not be stiff? And I said, well, you have to relax the rest of your attitude and give yourself a chance to try to do things differently. It's quite that simple. So go ahead, break into your groups. I want you to just take a few minutes. Don't make them long stories. Remember, you're after a response, and when you start to get it, distract yourself. Remember which stories are in which orders. And it's really simple. All we're after here is a little hesitation, a little frustration, a little impatience, and then we can get some want and desire. Now, which one's missing? There you go. Go for it.